All right, welcome to another deep dive. We got a really interesting request this time. You guys want to know more about U.S. interests and competition in Latin America, especially with how China is becoming more influential there.
It's certainly a hot topic right now.
Absolutely. And we have some great material to dig into, a Senate hearing transcript, and an excerpt from a policy paper someone sent us.
Sounds like a good mix.
Yeah, it should give us a good overview to the situation.
Yeah.
The Senate hearing, well, it focuses on U.S.-Latin America relations, with this whole thing about China's influence kind of hanging over everything.
Right.
And then the policy paper really dives into economic and diplomatic strategies the U.S. could use, to try and counter China's influence. But one thing that really jumped out at me from the hearing, and I'm curious to get your take on this, is that China is now the top trading partner for most South American countries.
Yeah, no, it's a huge development.
Like, that's a big shift. And I'm wondering, why is that happening? And more importantly, what can the U.S. do about it?
Well, as you said, it didn't just happen overnight. China's been very strategic. They've been building this presence for decades, really, using a mix of economic and diplomatic strategies.
So it's been a long game for them.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that really helps them is China's economic system, their state-controlled capitalism.
Right. They could do things that, well, we just can't.
Exactly. Like, imagine this. Chinese companies can go in and underbid U.S. companies on these huge infrastructure projects, sometimes even losing money, because they have the full backing of the Chinese state.
Ah, that makes sense. It's like they have a built-in advantage.
Right. And that makes it really tough for the U.S. to compete.
No kidding. But I'm
Yeah.
thinking about the long term here. What happens down the line? Because the hearing transcript, they mentioned some pretty serious concerns about these loans, these predatory loans, these debt traps.
And those concerns are completely valid. There's this very real risk that these countries, they end up becoming economically dependent on China.
I see what you mean. It's like they're getting hooked.
Right. And that's exactly what China wants. We've seen this happen already, like in Sri Lanka.
Oh, with that port.
Yeah, the Hambantota port. So China, they financed and built this massive port. And when Sri Lanka couldn't repay the loans, well, guess what? China took control of the port on a 99-year lease.
It's like they just took it.
Pretty much. And this debt trap diplomacy, it's not just a one-off thing, it's a pattern.
Yeah, it's happened in other places.
Right. And it's definitely something we need to watch for in Latin America.
So how do we fight that? I mean, we can't just start throwing money around like China, can we?
No, not really. And the good news is we don't have to. The policy paper, it emphasizes a different approach,
Okay, like what?
leveraging our strengths, the things the U.S. is already good at.
Okay, so what are those?
Things like the rule of law, reliable partnerships, and, the investments we already have in place in the region.
So it's about building on what we've already got.
Exactly. It's about building trust, showing that we're committed for the long haul. We can't just show up when there's a crisis and expect these countries to be happy.
Right. It's got to be more consistent than that.
Way more consistent. We have to be there year after year building those relationships.
Okay, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that really stuck with me from that hearing is they kept saying the U.S. needs to be more present, more engaged.
Yeah.
Like, we're falling behind when it comes to just being visible, being active diplomatically.
Oh, for sure. There's definitely room for improvement there. And it doesn't always have to be huge, flashy things. Sometimes just appointing U.S. ambassadors can make a big difference.
Oh, I see what you mean.
It shows we're taking it seriously, that we're invested in their success. And just increasing our diplomatic staff, having more people on the ground, those things can make a real impact. It's not just about showing up for a photo op. It's about being there, working with them day in and day out.
So it's about putting in the work, the real consistent effort.
Absolutely. That's what builds trust and real partnerships.
That makes sense. Now, what about foreign aid? I mean, has it been effective? Is the right tool to try to, counter China's influence, especially in the long term?
Well, the Senate hearing, they had a whole bunch of different opinions on that. Some experts, they were saying, look, strategic foreign aid can be helpful.
Right.
It can promote stability and development, especially if it's focused on good governance, helping them build strong institutions, that kind of thing.
So it's not just about giving them money, it's about helping them build something sustainable.
Right, exactly. But then others, they were questioning whether it's really effective, especially compared to what China's doing with these big infrastructure investments.
Yeah, like, can we really compete with that?
Yeah, it's tough. So I think the main takeaway is that if we're going to use aid, it needs to be tied to clear objectives.
Makes sense. We need to know what we're trying to achieve.
Exactly. And it can't just be about throwing money at the problem, We have to pair it with security measures.
Ah, so it's not just about writing checks, it's about a more comprehensive approach.
Exactly. And we got to make sure the aid is actually being used for what it's intended for.
That's a good point. Accountability matters.
Absolutely. And, there was also some discussion about the Americas Act, as a potential framework for economic engagement.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
And it's interesting because it really promotes private sector investment, getting U.S. companies more involved.
Ah, so using our economic power in a smart way.
Exactly. And it also pushes for strengthening regional partnerships, which I think is key. It's not just about the U.S. coming in and dictating terms. It's about working together with our partners in Latin America.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
And that kind of approach, it could be a much more sustainable way to compete with China's state-led model.
Okay, that's making a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But, we can't ignore the other big issues down there, like the security challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially the drug trade. I mean, the fentanyl crisis is just devastating.
And it all ties back to what's happening in Latin America.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us to, this crucial issue of how the U.S. and Mexico work together on security.
That relationship's always been complicated.
It has. But the Senate hearing, they really zeroed in on this, saying we need a much more coordinated approach, to really tackle this problem.
Right, because it's not just a Mexican problem, it's a U.S. problem, too.
Exactly.
And they even talked about, maybe designating the cartels as terrorist organizations.
Yeah, right. That came up.
Is that going to solve anything, or is that just like, a symbolic gesture?
Well, it would definitely be a strong statement.
Okay.
And there could be some real implications.
Okay, I'm listening.
One expert at the hearing, they suggested that if we designated the cartels as terrorist organizations, it could actually restrict the flow of illegal arms going south.
Oh, interesting.
Like, it could make it harder for them to get their hands on the weapons they're using. I see what you mean. It could have a ripple effect.
Right, it could have all these unintended consequences. But the truth is, we've been trying to stop the drug trade for decades.
And it feels like a losing battle, honestly.
It does.
I mean, the amount of money they're making, the corruption, it's just overwhelming.
Yeah, the corruption is a huge obstacle.
Huge.
And that's why, along with these traditional security measures, going after the cartels, we also have to focus on building stronger institutions down there.
This is about getting to the root of the problem.
Exactly. Promoting good governance, tackling the corruption.
Because that's what allows these criminal organizations to thrive.
Exactly. And that's where the idea of soft power comes in.
Oh, yeah, soft power.
Yeah.
But that's more than just, like, winning hearts and minds, right? What does that actually look like in the real world?
It's about using our values and our expertise to make a positive impact.
Okay, give me some examples.
So things like supporting education and healthcare, promoting democratic values, and also working to prevent mass migration, not just by trying to stop it at the border, but by addressing the root causes that are driving people to leave their homes in the first place.
So it's about creating a better environment down there.
Exactly.
So people don't feel like they have to flee.
Right.
That makes sense.
And it's about highlighting the good things that are already happening.
Instead of just focusing on all the problems.
Right.
Like, the U.S. has had some successes in Latin America.
Oh, for sure.
We've got partnerships that are working.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to talk about those more.
All right, I'm with you.
It's about painting a more complete picture.
Okay, I like that. But we can't ignore the really tough situations like what's going on in Haiti.
No, we can't. That's a crisis that's been going on for so long.
It's like people have forgotten about it.
Yeah, and it's a humanitarian crisis, obviously.
Absolutely.
But it also, it poses a real national security threat to the U.S.
Oh, yeah, it's right there on our doorstep.
Exactly. And the potential for it to destabilize the whole region, it's very real.
It's a reminder that we can't just ignore what's happening in our own neighborhood.
Exactly. And, the hearing also touched on this issue of Taiwan and diplomatic recognition?
Oh, right. That's a whole other layer of complexity.
Yeah, it is. And it's another point of contention with China.
Well, China wants everyone to recognize them and not Taiwan.
Right. And we've seen a number of countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, they've actually switched their diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to China in recent years.
Yeah, and they're often lured in with these promises of economic benefits.
Exactly. But, some of those promises, they haven't really materialized.
No, I was reading about that. Some of the countries that switch, they haven't seen the economic boom they were hoping for.
Right. And I think that gives the U.S. an opportunity.
Okay, how so?
Well, we can highlight the downsides of getting too cozy with China.
Show them what can happen if they go all in with China.
Exactly. And we can showcase Taiwan.
Because they're a success
Yeah,
story.
they are. They're democratic. They're prosperous.
So we can offer a different model, a different path.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
And, we can also reward the countries that are sticking with Taiwan
Like how?
by strengthening our own relationships with them, both diplomatically and economically.
So it's about showing them that we value their choices, their partnerships.
Exactly. And that there are benefits to aligning with the U.S.
Okay, wow, this is a lot to take in. I'm starting to see how complex this whole situation is.
It definitely is. It's multifaceted.
No easy answers here.
No, definitely not. But, the Senate hearing did offer some ideas about how the U.S. could be more effective in Latin America. And one of the big things that came up was this idea of reframing our entire approach, our policy towards the region.
Oh, yeah, this is where it gets interesting. I remember Senator Cornyn, he gave the panelists a kind of homework assignment.
Right.
He wanted them to come up with a new Trump doctrine for the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, I remember that.
So what came out of that? Did they manage to create a new doctrine?
Well, wasn't that simple,
Yeah, I figured.
It's not like they could just, write a new doctrine on the spot.
Yeah.
But they did raise some insightful points about how the U.S. could be more effective in the region. And one of the key takeaways was that we need to move beyond this outdated framework of the Monroe Doctrine.
The Monroe Doctrine. That always felt a little, I don't know, paternalistic.
Yeah.
Like we were telling Latin American countries what to do instead of treating them as equals.
Right. And that's exactly how it's often perceived in Latin America. Like, the U.S. is more interested in keeping Europe out than actually partnering with its neighbors.
So what's the alternative? What did they propose to replace the Monroe Doctrine with?
Well, there wasn't one specific replacement that everyone agreed on, but there was this clear consensus that we need a more collaborative approach,
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
one that recognizes these countries as equal partners.
Because we can't just dictate terms anymore.
Exactly. The world has changed, and we need to adapt.
So it's about finding common ground, working together to achieve things that benefit everyone involved,
Precisely.
not just telling them what to do.
Right. And it means recognizing that these countries have their own goals, their own priorities.
Yeah, we need to respect that.
Absolutely.
So it's about finding those areas where our interests align, where we can work together to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes.
Exactly. And it means being willing to listen to our partners, to learn from them, and to be flexible in our approach. Because one size doesn't fit all in Latin America.
Okay, that's starting to make a lot of sense to me. But let's get down to brass tacks here.
Sure.
How do we translate these big ideas,
Yeah.
these principles, into concrete actions?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And I think that's what our listeners are really going to want to know. Like, what can we actually do to make a difference?
Right. And, the Senate hearing, they really wrestled with that question. And one of the things they emphasized was the need to be more strategic, more coordinated in how we approach Latin America.
So it's about being more intentional, more thoughtful.
Exactly. And someone even suggested creating a dedicated America's desk within the White House.
Oh, interesting. So like a central point of contact for all things Latin America.
Yeah, exactly. So that all the different parts of the government are working together, that everyone's on the same page.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because I imagine things can get pretty siloed in Washington.
Oh, for sure. So that was one idea. Another thing they talked about was engaging the private sector more.
Oh, yeah. U.S. companies, they have a long history in Latin America.
They do.
But as we discussed earlier, those investments don't always translate into, goodwill towards the U.S. government.
That's true. And that's why we have to be smart about it. We have to find ways to amplify the positive impacts that U.S. businesses are having.
So it's not just about letting them go down there and do whatever they want.
No, it's about working together, making sure that our economic engagement actually benefits both sides.
So it's about creating a win-win scenario,
Exactly.
not just exploiting resources or looking for those quick profits.
Right. And it's about showcasing the benefits of partnering with the U.S. Things like transparency, accountability, a commitment to sustainable development. Those are things that China can't always offer.
Okay, that's a good point. It's about offering a different model.
Exactly. And we have to be proactive.
Proactive, not reactive.
Right. We can't just wait for China to make a move and then try to counter it.
You have to set the agenda.
Exactly. We have to shape the narrative.
So it's about being more assertive, more strategic.
Exactly.
Not just reacting to events, but anticipating them.
And it's about recognizing that the U.S. has a unique role to play in this hemisphere.
We're not just another player.
No, we're not. We have a responsibility to lead.
But leadership takes vision. And it takes a deep understanding of, the region you're trying to lead.
Absolutely. That leadership has to be grounded in a real understanding of Latin America, its history, its culture, its aspirations.
So we can't just come in with our own preconceived notions and expect them to fall in line.
Right. We have to build genuine partnerships.
Partnerships based on mutual respect, shared values.
Exactly.
Not just transactional relationships, where we're just looking for what we can get out of it.
Right. And, the U.S. has a lot to offer Latin America.
I believe that.
And Latin America has a lot to offer the U.S.
It's a two-way street.
Exactly. We need to rediscover that sense of shared purpose, shared destiny.
Okay, I'm convinced.
Yeah.
But how do we convince everyone else? How do we convince the American people, the taxpayers, that investing in Latin America is worth it?
That's a big challenge.
Because it's not always easy to see the connection
Right.
between what's happening down there and our lives up here.
You're right. And, one of the things that came out of that Senate hearing was that we need to do a better job of explaining this.
We need to make the case for why Latin America matters.
Exactly. Why it's in our own national interest to be engaged in the region.
So it's not just about charity or, some abstract sense of, global responsibility.
Right.
It's about our own security, our own prosperity.
It is. The costs of disengaging from Latin America, they're far greater than the costs of engaging. If we cede ground to China, we're going to pay a much higher price down the road.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light here.
And, it's not just about money.
No, it's about more than that.
It's about political will. It's about our leaders making Latin America a priority. And it's about engaging the American people, making them understand why this region matters, why it's worth investing in.
So it's about leadership, vision, and, really recognizing that these relationships in Latin America, they're not just a nice to have.
No, they're not.
They're crucial to our national interests.
Absolutely. And it's about understanding that engaging with Latin America, it's not just about countering China.
It's about something bigger than that.
It is. It's about building a more stable world, a more prosperous world, a more democratic world.
A world where the U.S. and Latin America can work together as partners.
Exactly.
To address the challenges we all face.
To create a better future for everyone.
All right, I'm feeling inspired. But how do we turn these words into action?
That's a great question.
What are some concrete steps we can take? Because I think that's where our listeners are really going to want to lean in.
I think you're right. And that's what we're going to explore in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, great. So stay tuned, folks. We're just getting started.
So you're asking about concrete steps to strengthen those relationships.
Yeah, how do we actually do this?
Well, the thing is, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Right. Latin America's a big place.
It is. Each country's got its own unique opportunities and challenges.
So we can't just apply the same playbook everywhere.
Exactly. But there are some overarching principles.
Okay, I like that. Give me some principles.
One of the big things is we need to think beyond just the traditional, government-to-government relationships.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more.
Well, think about it. Latin America has these vibrant civil societies, dynamic businesses, incredibly passionate individuals.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And we need to tap into those networks,
I'm following you.
Foster those people-to-people connections.
So it's about building relationships at all levels, not just at the top.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that real change, lasting change, it comes from within.
We can't just impose things from the outside.
No, we can't. We need to support homegrown initiatives.
Empower local actors.
Yes, exactly. And we need to be a reliable partner.
Not just show up when it's convenient for us.
Right. One of the criticisms we heard in that Senate hearing was that the U.S., we tend to be kind of inconsistent in our engagement with Latin America.
Yeah, we show up when there's a crisis and then we disappear once things calm down.
Right. And that creates mistrust.
Oh, I bet it does.
If we really want to build strong, lasting relationships, we have to be there for the long haul.
Through thick and thin.
Through thick and thin, exactly. We have to show them that our commitments are more than just words.
Actions speak louder than words.
They do.
Yeah.
And we also have to recognize that Latin America, it's not just our backyard.
It's more than that.
It's a region that's vitally important to U.S. interests.
We need to start acting like it.
We do.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here, but let's get down to some specifics.
Sure.
What are some areas where the U.S. can really make a difference, a tangible difference?
Well, the Senate hearing, they talked about a number of key sectors.
Okay, like what?
Energy, infrastructure, technology, education.
All right, let's break those down one by one.
Right.
Let's start with energy. Latin America has a lot of natural resources, right?
Yeah, tons.
I mean, oil, obviously, but also solar, wind. It seems like there's a lot of potential there.
There is. And it goes way beyond oil.
Okay, so what's the play here?
Well, there's a huge opportunity for collaboration in renewables, energy efficiency, clean technologies.
This is where the U.S. could really step in.
Exactly. You know, we can provide expertise, investment, technology transfer.
Help them develop their energy sectors in a sustainable way.
Exactly.
So it's a win-win.
It is.
It helps address climate change, promotes economic growth, strengthens energy security for everyone.
And it helps reduce dependence on, less reliable partners.
Yeah, like Venezuela or Russia.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What about infrastructure? I have a feeling China's probably got a pretty big footprint in that area already, given what we talked about before.
Oh, yeah, they definitely do. China's been pouring money into infrastructure projects all over Latin America.
Ports, railroads, highways.
Airports, everything.
And as we discussed earlier, those investments, they often come with strings attached.
Right. And that's why the U.S. needs to step up.
But how do we compete with that?
Yeah.
China's got deep pockets.
We do have a lot to offer, though.
Okay, like what?
Technical expertise, project management, maintaining high standards. We can help them develop infrastructure that's sustainable, resilient, stuff that actually benefits their communities.
So it's about quality over quantity.
Exactly.
Building things that last, not just quick fixes that end up benefiting, someone else's agenda.
Right. And it's about making sure these projects are environmentally and socially responsible.
We've got to learn from the mistakes of the past.
We do. We can't just repeat the same old patterns.
Right, I'm with you. What about technology? Latin America has a pretty booming tech sector, right?
Oh, yeah. Tons of innovation and entrepreneurial energy down there.
Yeah. And it seems like there's a natural synergy there, given how strong the U.S. tech sector is.
Absolutely. And we can be a really valuable partner.
Okay. How so?
Well, we can share our expertise in things like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, digital infrastructure.
Help them build their own tech ecosystems.
Exactly.
All right. And last but not least, education.
Ah, yes.
I feel like that's the foundation of any strong society.
It is. And it's an area where, even individuals can have a real impact.
So what can we do on that front?
Well, the U.S. has a long history of supporting educational exchanges and partnerships.
Okay.
And we can do more of that.
More scholarships.
More scholarships, yeah.
Help them build world-class universities and research institutions.
Exactly. We can help them develop the next generation of leaders.
Okay, these are all great ideas. But let's be realistic here.
Sure.
This all sounds pretty expensive.
It's an investment.
But how do we pay for it?
That's a fair question.
Especially when there are so many other things competing for resources.
You're right. But we need to have a serious conversation about this as a nation.
Because it's important.
It is. The truth is, investing in Latin America, it's investing in our own security and prosperity.
So it's not just about charity, it's about strategic self-interest.
Exactly. The costs of disengagement are far greater than the costs of engagement.
If we just walk away, we'll end up paying a much higher price down the line.
We will, both economically and strategically.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's not just about money, right?
No, it's not. It's about more than that. It's about political will. It's about our leaders actually making Latin America a priority.
Yeah, they have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Exactly. And it's about engaging the American people.
Making them understand why this region matters.
Exactly, why it's worth investing in.
So it's about leadership, vision, and it's about recognizing that our relationships in Latin America, they're not just a nice to have.
They're not.
They're essential to our national interests.
They are. And, engaging with Latin America, it's not just about countering China.
It's about something bigger.
It is. It's about building a more stable world, a more prosperous world, a more democratic world, a world where the U.S. and Latin America can work together as partners to address the challenges we all face, to create a better future for all of us.
Well said. So where do we go from here? How do we actually turn these ideas into action? I think that's what our listeners are really eager to hear about.
And that's exactly what we're going to talk about when we come back. We're going to dive into some specific actions that you, our listeners, can take to make a difference.
All right, folks, don't go anywhere. We're just getting warmed up. Okay, we've talked a lot about the big picture, but now I'm ready to get down to brass tacks.
Yeah.
You've convinced me that Latin America really matters and that we all have a role to play, but what does that actually look like? Give us the action plan. What can our listeners actually do to make a difference?
All right, let's get tactical. Remember those sectors we talked about? Energy, infrastructure, technology, education.
Yeah.
Those are all areas where you can get involved.
Okay, give me the playbook. Where do we start?
Well, let's start with energy. You can support companies that are working on renewable energy projects in Latin America.
Okay.
A lot of U.S. companies are really leading the way in solar, wind, geothermal.
Yeah, I've seen that.
So check out their websites, learn about their projects, and if it makes sense for you, consider investing in them.
So I can actually put my money where my mouth is, support green energy, and help Latin America at the same time. Sign me up. Okay, what about infrastructure? That feels a little tougher, for an individual to get involved in.
It can be, but there are still things you can do. You can research organizations that are working on sustainable infrastructure development in Latin America.
Okay, so, who are we talking about here?
Groups like the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, they're doing some really interesting work.
Okay, so I could support them, donate or something.
Exactly. Even just being aware of what they're doing, spreading the word. And don't underestimate the power of just talking to your elected officials, letting them know that you care about U.S. investment in sustainable infrastructure in Latin America.
Okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
I can put on my advocate hat and make my voice heard. Now, technology, that's a bit more my speed.
Ah.
Yeah. What can I do on that front? I'm much more comfortable with a keyboard than I am with a shovel.
Well, there's a lot you can do. You can support Latin American tech startups.
Oh, okay.
There are all these crowdfunding platforms now.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those.
And you can actually invest in these promising young companies.
So help them get off the ground.
Exactly. It's a great way to support innovation and entrepreneurship. And who knows, you might even make a little money yourself down the line.
Oh, I like that. Helping startups and potentially making a profit. Now that's smart investing.
No.
Okay, last but not least, education. I feel like this is an area where individuals can really make a difference, even on a small scale.
I think you're right. You can volunteer with organizations that provide educational opportunities.
Okay.
There are groups that offer scholarships. They run mentorship programs, facilitate exchange programs.
Yeah, I've heard of some of those.
And all of these can have such a lasting impact on young people's lives.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so those all sound like amazing ways to make a direct impact. But what about those of us who maybe don't have the time or resources to volunteer or travel? Are there other ways to contribute?
Oh, for sure. Don't forget about your own skills and experience. If you have expertise in a particular area, you could teach online classes or workshops.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Right. There are platforms that connect volunteers with educational institutions in Latin America. So you could, teach a class on marketing or design, whatever you're good at.
Wow, I hadn't thought of that. That's pretty amazing. There really are so many possibilities.
There are. And every little bit helps, The important thing is to find something that resonates with you, something you're passionate about, and then take action. It doesn't have to be this grand gesture.
Just do something.
Exactly. It's about taking those first steps and then making a commitment to stay engaged.
Wow, this deep dive has been amazing. It's really opened my eyes to just how important U.S. engagement in Latin America is.
Yeah.
And it's given me some concrete ways that I can get involved. It's not just about politics. It's about people, partnerships, and building a better future together. What about you? Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up?
What strikes me the most is that this isn't just about geopolitics or, economic competition. It's about people. It's about building bridges of understanding and working together to create a better future for all of us. So I encourage you, reach out, get involved, make a difference.
Well said. And on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dive into U.S. interests and competition in Latin America.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, but this is just the beginning of the conversation. We hope you'll continue to explore this fascinating and important region, and we challenge you to find your own way to make a positive impact. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.